At this point, you might be thinking that the topic of selection is for noobs, because we talked about it on, day 1 of the Blender Basics, and by now it should be second nature in both object mode and edit mode. But if you think about it, selection is a whole half of the modeling process. You have to first select something in order to do an operation on it. So being able to quickly make complex selections is a big part of what allows you to quickly make complex models. So it's definitely worth paying attention to. In this video, we're going to cover some of the most important aspects of selection in Blender again as a refresher, but then talk about some more advanced selection tools that are going to make your life a lot easier. First, a reminder that even though we have 3 different selection modes, vertices, edges, and faces, the operations that we do in Blender aren't different for different selection modes. For example, if I select these vertices here and I bevel with Control B, that's going to be the exact same thing as if I selected an edge and also hit Control B. Or if I select a face and hit Control B to bevel, again, that just does the exact same thing. But in a lot of different apps, that's not really how it works, because in those apps, each selection mode has its own set of unique operators. This may take some time to get comfortable with in Blender if that's what you're used to, but I think you'll find that it makes selection a lot more flexible. The main thing to be aware of is that if you have a whole bunch of edge loops, here I put in a bunch with Control R and scrolling up and hitting Enter. If I select one of these edge loops by Alt left clicking on one of them, and then I Alt Shift left click to select the one next to it, then we're going to select the whole face loop that's in between. Because if I select a vertex and also the vertex next to it, the edge in between is going to become selected as well. So if I wanted to select just those edge loops, but without any of the faces or edges in between, then I'd have to go into Edge Select mode by hitting 2 on the top row of number keys, Alt left clicking, and then Alt Shift left clicking to select the next one. And now that face in between is no longer selected. So you do have to get used to changing the different selection modes based on what you want to have selected, but we're still going to be able to use the same operations regardless of what selection mode we're in. The other important point to remember is that what you see in Blender is what you're able to select. So if you can't see it, then you're not able to select it. For example, if I just left click and drag to box select this section of my cube here, it's going to select those edges on the front, but it's not going to select any of the edges on the back. And that's just because they're not visible. So if we want to make them visible, we could either go to X-ray view up here in the top right of the 3D view and select like so. Or if we don't want to go into X-ray, we can also go into wireframe view and do the same thing. Now, if you want to do this quickly, you can also use Shift-Z as the hotkey to switch back and forth from wireframe view, or Alt-Z to toggle on and off X-ray. You can also use the Z hotkey pie menu and swipe between wireframe and solid view, or if you go to Edit and Preferences, over to the key map section, and check on Extra Shading Pie menu items, then when you hit Z, you'll also be able to toggle on and off X-ray. So I'll be doing that a lot in this course, and there's a lot of ways to do it, but just know that Alt-Z or Shift-Z or using the Z hotkey is something that you'll need to do if you want to make selections behind what's in front. This is a common cause of confusion for beginners because they might be looking at something in top view, select all of it, and do some operation, not really realizing that the rest of the cube is not selected. Though every once in a while, you'll get some stragglers like you see in the bottom here, and hopefully that'll get fixed at some point. Okay, another thing that we already talked about was selecting edge loops and edge rings. Selecting edge loops with Alt left clicking on an edge, and then it'll continue that edge all the way around until it runs into either a pole or an end-gon, and it can't continue any further. For example, this vertex right here is a pole because it does not have 4 vertices that are connected to it, and so that edge loop just stops. Now, you can also select edge loops with the menu by selecting an edge and then going to Select Loops, and choosing Edge Loops. The reason you might want to do this via the menu is if you want to select a whole bunch of edge loops at the same time. So if you wanted to select, some of these edges here, then you could go to Select Loops, and Edge Loops like so. Though in this case, that's not that different than just holding Alt and Shift. So you can do that in the 3D viewport as well. But there are some situations where I find doing this via the menu can be pretty helpful. You can also select edge rings by going to Control and Alt left clicking. And let's add a couple more edge loops with Control R here just so we can see that a bit better. Alt A to deselect everything. And then Control Alt left click to select the edge ring that goes all the way around. You can also select edge loops and edge rings in vertex select mode. So if I switch over to 1 and look at vertex select mode, I can select edge loops here. And if I select an edge ring, again, it's going to select a face loop because it's also going to select the edges in between. And of course, if I go to 3, I can also Alt left click to select a face loop. And there's not really such thing as a face ring, so Alt Control left click will just do the exact same thing. Again, even though we're in face select mode, the way to do this without having to guess is to select an edge that is perpendicular to the loop that you want to select. So if I want to select the one going this way horizontally, I'm going to Alt left click on one of these vertical edges. Okay, and we already talked about selecting everything and deselecting everything, but just as a reminder, that is A and Alt A. Also in the Blender Basics, we talked about the tools up in the toolbar. We have the tweak, select box, select circle, and select lasso, though we can also get to all of these via hotkeys or from the menu. So we could go to select and choose box, circle, or lasso select, just like so. But we can also get to these really easily via hotkeys. So even if we're using a completely different tool, I can also box select at any time by hitting B and then left clicking and dragging. This is helpful to know because it also works in other editors like the graph editor and node editor. To lasso select something, I just hold Control and then right click and drag around. So again, I don't have to switch to the lasso tool to do that. I can just again hold Control, right click and drag. And then if I want to subtract from that, I can hold down Control and then Shift left click and drag. To deselect something with the hotkey for the box select tool, I can hit B and then middle mouse button and drag. It would be cool if that was consistent between the two, but Control, middle mouse button, and dragging zooms you in, so that's already taken. But that's stuff that we've already talked about, so let's get on to some of the more exciting operations. One that you're going to be using all the time is select more or less. So to do that, just make a selection and then go to the select menu, more or less, and choose more or less. More will grow the selection around the selection, and less will shrink it. So the hotkeys for that are Control plus on the number pad or Control minus on the number pad, so you can do this extremely quickly. There are some options here. So you could turn off face step, and let's turn that off for select more, and you can see that it grows more as a diamond there. Or if you turn on face step, then what it will do is grow out more like a box. So this is extremely handy for selecting whole sections of things, because then you can quickly go around and make a couple selections and then grow that selection to select a whole perimeter. And in the lesson where we model a soccer ball, and actually a bunch of these lessons, this hotkey is going to be incredibly helpful. So again, Control plus and Control minus on the number pad. Also in the select menu, we can do some cool things like select sharp edges, where we can set a degree, and it's probably better to be in edge select mode here. Select and sharp edges, and that way we'll get only the corners of our object. Another one of the commands that I use all the time is select similar. So if I go to select down to select similar, there's a whole bunch of attributes about the selection, and this menu is going to change depending on whether you have vertices, edges, or faces selected. But if I wanted to select all of the edges that have the same length or a similar length as the one that I currently have selected, then I can do just that. You can also get to this menu with the hotkey Shift G. So not only does this work with edges, but also with vertices. So for example, if I wanted to only select the corners of this cube, I know that they're the only vertices that are only connected to 3 vertices rather than 4. So I can select one, hit Shift G, and choose amount of connecting edges. That's pretty basic when I only have 6 of them, but if I had 500 of them, then that would make my life a whole lot easier. Similarly with faces, I can select a face, hit Shift G, and for example, choose all of the faces that have a similar area. Or if I hit Shift G and use coplanar, another one that I find incredibly helpful, it'll find all of the faces that are on the exact same plane. So for example, if I take this section of faces here and I'll just hit Shift D to duplicate along the x-axis, I'll put one over there, and then I'll Shift D, move another one over on the x-axis, but this time bring it slightly out along the y. If I want to select only these 2 sections, then I can select one of these faces, hit Shift G, and use coplanar. And since these are lined up perfectly, they'll all be selected, but this one will not. But if I wanted to just choose all of the faces that are pointed the same direction, regardless of what plane they're on, then I can hit Shift G and choose normal. Since they're all facing the same direction, they all get selected. Another one that's incredibly helpful is selecting linked, or all of the geometry that's currently connected to the selection. So if I go to select one of these faces, and then go to select linked, and choose linked, then it'll select all of the geometry, again, that's connected to the current selection. Then I can go ahead and delete that. You can also do that in the 3D viewport just by selecting something and hitting Control L. Or you can also just hover your mouse over a section of the mesh and hit L. So that'll pick whatever is under the mouse. The reason that these are two different hotkeys is that if you just hit L, it'll pick whatever is under the mouse. But if you wanted to do this on multiple selections and the mouse is, somewhere way over here, then you can hit Control L and it'll do that for all of the selected faces regardless of where the mouse is. So again, if I want to get rid of this whole selection, I'll just hover my mouse over it, hit L, and then delete and vertices. Yet another amazing tool is select shortest path. So if I go to vertex select mode, and I want to select the shortest path between this corner and this one, I'll hold Shift and select both of them, then go to select linked, and choose shortest path. This command is also incredibly helpful because if we want to select, say, from here to here, but we don't want to select the loop that goes all the way around, then we can just use this command, which we can also get to just by holding Control when we left-click on the second vertex. So if I left-click to select the first one, hold down Control, left-click to select the second one, then we've selected all of the vertices in between, but not the ones that wrap around to the other side. It does that based on the active vertex, so I could also just make a path by continuing to hold down Control and left-clicking. I'll hit Alt-A to deselect everything, and then I only want to select this front face here, so I'll just box select it. And the next one that I want to talk about is actually a deselection tool. So I've selected this entire grid of faces, and I'll go to face select mode actually so that this makes a little bit more sense. And then I'll go to select and checker deselect. What this allows us to do is deselect patterns of faces, which is pretty interesting. It just goes every other, but you can change this over in the redo panel in the bottom left, where we can add more gaps in between. But where this is really helpful is if you have, let's say, this whole section selected, and let's pretend that these are, 100 faces, not just a few. And if we go to select and checker deselect, then we're able to quickly make a pattern with our selection and then extrude or inset or do whatever we need to those faces. But of course that works for vertices and edges just as well. Then the last ones that I want to show you are select and select by trait. The first is loose geometry, and this is really helpful if you have some vertices. I'll just take one here and Shift D to duplicate it. And let's say we have some vertices just floating off in space. Now, you'd probably never create this on purpose, but sometimes it happens by accident, or if you're importing a model from other places, this just can happen sometimes, and it can definitely be annoying to clean up. But if you go to select by trait, and loose geometry, it'll select all of those vertices automatically, and you can quickly delete them. You can also use this tool to check for triangles and n-gons. So let's say we have some triangles here. I'll select some faces like so, and let's go to face and triangulate faces. And then I'll also take 4 of these faces and go to vertex and new edge or face from vertices to make a new n-gon there, or we can use the hotkey F, just so that we have some triangles and at least one n-gon. Well, if I'm wondering if I have any of these on my mesh, I can go to select by trait, and choose faces by sides. I can bump this down to equal 3 to see if I have any triangles, or I could deselect everything, go do that again, choose 4, and choose greater than to select any n-gons. The importance of triangles and n-gons we haven't quite talked about yet, and we will later in the course, but I wanted to show you this here because it is a helpful selection tool. The last selection trick that I want to show you is how to save your selection for later. Because if you make a complex selection, you might want to come back to working on these same pieces, but then if you go to select something else and do something on a different part of your mesh, you'd have to re-pick all of these individually, and that's just a hassle. So the way to save your selection is to go to the Object Data tab, which is the green triangle with 3 vertices to represent the mesh data, and we can save sets of vertices as vertex groups. So if I just select some faces here, add a new vertex group, and click Assign, then I can deselect and work on my mesh, and then when I want to select those again, I can just choose Select. Now you might notice that it also selected the edge in between these faces, and that's because vertex groups save, well, vertices, and not edges or faces. So if you want to see exactly what the vertex group is going to look like, you should probably look at it in vertex select mode. From there, we can just click Assign. Thanks to some recent changes, we can also save some edges and faces now, but it is a little bit more cumbersome. But the way to do that is with attributes. So let's say we want to save a selection of faces. Let's say like that. Something that just wouldn't work super well with the regular vertex groups. I can make that selection and then add a new attribute. I'll call this one Faces. I'll set the domain to Face since we want to save faces, and then set the data type from float to Boolean since we just want to save whether it's selected or not. Then click Add, and then as long as Faces is selected in the attributes list, then you can go to Mesh, all the way down to Set Attribute, and just check this on. So then all of the selected faces will have a Boolean value of 1, but all of the deselected faces will have the default value of 0. So then if we deselect everything else and work on the rest of our mesh, we can always get back to this again by making sure that this faces attribute is selected, and then going to Select and by attribute. So that's not as handy as working with vertex groups. I'm sure there's some add-ons that make it a bit faster, but if you need to save a selection of edges or faces, then that's the way to go. Before you move on to the next video, I'd like you to practice all of the different selection methods that we talked about in this video. I know that selection seems a little more boring than the actual operations, but I promise you that it's worth it, especially if you want to make complex models. Also, I know that staring at cubes isn't super thrilling as well, so we'll put these to more interesting use in later videos. But for now, just keep practicing on simple geometry until you get the hang of it.